My name is Kira. I'm 37 years old and I live in Alexandria, Virginia. Or at least, I used to. I guess nothing feels that permanent anymore. I sent the message just as the plane taxied down the runway. Wheels up, should land around 3:40. Anyone able to pick me up? That was all I wrote. No emojis, no small talk. Just the facts. I dropped it into the family group chat and shut my screen off before it could light up again. It had been 7 days since the cremation, 8 since the explosion. I hadn't spoken a full sentence to anyone in my family since before I left. That wasn't new. I watched the clouds roll beneath us as the city fell away. Somewhere, below that blanket of white, were my people, or at least the ones I had always thought were. And somewhere beyond that, probably in some quiet office with framed accolades and a thick carpet, someone in the foundation was reviewing the schedule, preparing for my arrival like it mattered. The plane touched down exactly on time. I didn't bother checking the chat until after I made it past customs. My passport still bore my married name. I hadn't decided yet if I'd keep it. The messages were waiting. Tom. Sorry, I've got a shift. We're short-staffed again. Hope you can find a ride. Mom. You really should have coordinated better. It's not like we knew your exact return date. You're not the only one with a life, Kira. I stared at them for a long second. Then I slid my phone into my coat pocket and walked. No response, no argument, just silence. The airport was crowded, of course. A wall of balloons, handmade signs, tears, flashes. All the things you're supposed to come home to when your life splits in two. People hugging, people crying, kids running into arms. One woman behind me gasped when she saw a soldier. Another kept saying, "He's back, like she had been holding her breath the entire time. I walked past them all. There was no one waiting for me at baggage claim, no familiar voice, no outstretched hand. But there were 3 men in navy suits standing just to the side, one holding a small white envelope with my name written in sharp, exact handwriting. I gave them a nod. "Mrs. Sharif?" one asked. As though he didn't already know, they ushered me into a black sedan with tinted windows. It smelled faintly of eucalyptus. One of them placed my bag in the trunk without a word. Another sat in the front seat, scrolling through his phone. The third sat beside me, quiet, his hands folded, a badge clipped to his belt that he never once acknowledged. A photographer trailed discreetly behind, snapping a few respectful photos as the car pulled away. I didn't wave. I didn't cry. On my lap sat a folder from the foundation. Logistics, they said. A brief note from the board. A commemorative badge. The schedule for the upcoming symposium, where they'd announce the new chair of the climate resilience arm, the one my husband built. I didn't open it. The car slid out of the airport and onto the highway, the driver murmuring something to dispatch. I leaned back into the leather seat and closed my eyes. There were no flowers, no hugs, no questions, just this. The quiet ride home in someone else's car, from someone else's world. The one he built, the one he died for, and the only one that remembered I was still alive. The news segment aired just past 7. I wasn't watching, not at first. I'd taken my food into the living room without much appetite, and sat cross-legged on the floor, still wearing the black blouse from earlier, collar wrinkled from the long flight. The reporter's voice drifted in from the kitchen television. "Tonight we remember Dr. Simon Arendt, climate scientist, humanitarian, and co-founder of the Gaia Resilience Trust. After a tragic explosion in northern Pakistan last week, his wife Kira Sharif returned to the United States alone." I froze. The fork hung in the air for a second before I slowly set it down. The camera cut to grainy footage from the airport. There I was, walking through a crowded terminal, flanked by 3 members of Simon's research team. They stayed close, 2 behind and 1 beside, like some kind of formation. I didn't realize, in the moment, how military it must have looked. No one was smiling. No one said a word. The voiceover continued. While her family was notably absent from the terminal, members of Dr. Arendt's foundation were present to escort his widow. One of them, Dr. Annika Bell, called it an honor to walk with Kira during her return. The footage shifted to the handoff. I'd forgotten the cameras were still rolling by then. I was standing beside the black sedan, slipping a small white box into Annika's hands. No one said anything, but she gave a slight bow. Not performative, just respectful. The kind you give someone who's been carrying too much for too long. Inside that box was everything Simon had written in the final 3 months of his life. Research notes, climate models, field reports. Unpublished, encrypted, complete. The screen faded to a still photo of it. Just the white box on a polished table. Beneath it, the network displayed my handwritten note, shown in close-up. If you ever find yourself alone in your grief, don't wait for those who left. Walk with those who stayed. K.S. I didn't even remember writing it. The next shot was from earlier that day. The moment I exited the car, flanked by the foundation team, the white envelope still in my hand. The camera had caught the exact second I looked up at the crowd and realized no one with my name would be waiting. The reporter continued, her voice soft now. Dr. Arendt's work affected thousands, from disaster zones to academic journals, but perhaps most profoundly, the people closest to him. His colleagues said Kira's strength and grace in the face of both loss and abandonment reflected the same values her husband stood for. There was a pause. Then the screen went dark, and the next segment began. Something about a city council debate. Voices already louder, more urgent. I muted it. For a long time, I just sat there. My phone buzzed twice from the counter. I didn't check it. Eventually, I stood and washed my dish. When I finally looked at the family group chat, it was still stuck on the last message from Mom. You really should have coordinated better. No one had followed up, but they'd seen it. I knew they had. Tom always had the news on in his truck. And Mom, despite pretending to be allergic to anything too political, never missed a local feature, especially one with academic names and tragic gravitas. Still, the chat was silent. No reaction, no denial. Just blank space under a thread with my husband's name in it. That silence said more than any apology ever could. By morning, the clip had spread far beyond the local channel. It started small, a couple reposts on Twitter with quiet captions like, "This is what dignity looks like," and "She walked through that airport like a statue." But by mid-afternoon, a professor from UC Berkeley had quote-tweeted the footage of me handing off the white box. Then came the climate journalists, the NGO crowd, the science Twitter folks who used to tag Simon in long threads about logistics infrastructure or drought mitigation. By the time I opened my inbox around 3, there were 37 unread messages. A photojournalist wanted permission to use the footage in a longer piece about field worker spouses. A humanitarian newsletter editor asked if I'd like to submit a short op-ed. From the widow's lens, someone from Simon's alma mater sent a short note. Your composure says more than a eulogy ever could. Wishing you peace. And then, around 3:20 p.m., came the first text from someone I actually knew. Was that you on Channel 8? Janine, my sister-in-law. I didn't reply. She followed up 3 minutes later with, we didn't realize it was going to be so public. Still, I left it unread. Later that evening, Mom posted a photo on Facebook, an old one. I recognized it instantly. Me and Tom in a backyard kiddie pool, probably 6 and 8 years old. I was in a one-piece bathing suit with a popsicle stain down the front. Tom had a pair of neon sunglasses on upside down. The caption read, "Some bonds never break." I didn't even have to scroll the comments. I knew exactly the tone they'd take. Sentimental, nostalgic, a few aunts chiming in with "so true" or "miss those days." But it didn't take long for other voices to chime in. Funny, wasn't she the one who just came home to an empty terminal? Hard to preach about bonds when you won't show up for someone's worst day. Don't post about love if you didn't bother to bring it to the airport. By the time I checked back, the post was deleted. That night, Tom texted me directly. No context, no greeting, just, didn't know it was that big a deal. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing. You made your choice. Then I put my phone down and went to bed. The following morning, I opened my inbox to a message from a producer at Channel 11. Subject line, request for on-air interview. They said they wanted to do a follow-up on Simon's legacy, but more than that, they were interested in my story. Not the science, the return, the silence, the note. I stared at it for a long time. I had no intention of becoming a face for anything. I wasn't interested in going viral or being inspirational, but I did know this. People had seen the truth, and I wasn't going to let someone else reshape it for comfort. So I replied, "Yes, I'll speak, but I won't perform." That was all I wrote. And that was all it needed to be. The studio was colder than I expected. All white walls, matte lights, and a chair that creaked the moment I sat down. There were no flowers, no water bottles, no makeup crew fussing over me. Just a sound tech adjusting a clip-on mic, and a woman named Carla sitting across from me with a quiet clipboard and a voice soft enough to disappear. "This isn't meant to be sensational," she said, tapping her pen against the armrest. "You don't have to name anyone. Just share what feels honest." I nodded once. The countdown started on a screen in the corner. 5, 4, 3. Carla looked straight into the camera, then into me. "We're joined tonight by Kira Sharif, widow of the late Dr. Simon Arendt, climate scientist, humanitarian, and co-founder of the Gaia Resilience Trust. Kira recently returned home from her husband's memorial abroad and found herself at the center of an unexpected public conversation." She paused. "Thank you for being here." I looked straight at her. "Thank you for asking." She waited a beat, then leaned forward. I think a lot of people saw the clip and wondered the same thing. What was it like landing here, not as Simon's partner, but as someone suddenly very visible? I folded my hands in my lap. My wedding band was still there. I didn't expect anyone to be watching. I just expected someone to show up. Carla didn't speak, just nodded once, letting the silence stretch. "I didn't ask for a parade," I added. "I didn't even ask for flowers. I sent a message, one message, to the same group chat we've used for holidays, doctor's appointments, graduation reminders. All I said was, 'Landing at 3:40, anyone available?'" "And no one responded?" she asked gently. "They responded," I said, "just not with presence." There was a shift in the room, a kind of collective exhale behind the camera. She let it sit before speaking again. "What do you want people to understand now that your story has reached so many?" I thought for a moment. "That grief doesn't ask you to be performative. It doesn't want grand speeches or perfect timing. It just wants company, that's all. Presence." I looked toward the camera. "Blood doesn't entitle you to absence." Carla tilted her head. "And yet people showed up for you. Simon's colleagues, the foundation staff, people who knew him through his work." "Yes," I said. "They didn't ask me what I needed. They just came, quietly, without obligation. Not because it was required, but because it was right." She looked down at her notes, but didn't read from them. "One last question," she said. "If someone's watching this, and they feel like they've been left behind, maybe not just by family, but by the systems and communities meant to hold them, what would you say?" I paused. "Find the ones who stay," I said. "You don't have to make noise. Just open the door to the ones who knock. That's enough." She smiled, not brightly, but kindly. The kind of smile that said, "We hear you." When the segment ended, the mic tech unhooked me in silence. A producer offered me tea, which I declined. I walked out the same way I walked in, alone. By the time I got home, the segment was already up online. Within the hour, the clip was being reposted by professors, peace workers, and war widows, from places I couldn't even pronounce. One woman from Sierra Leone messaged me directly. "You said what I could not." But what hit hardest was what didn't come. The group chat, the one with my name and Tom's and Mom's, now said only group. No icon, no photo, no title. At the bottom of the screen, Margaret left the conversation. That was the first choice she'd made without blaming me. I turned off my phone and let the quiet take its place. The first letter arrived 3 days after the interview. A pale blue envelope, handwritten, tucked between a pile of condolence cards and a pre-approved credit offer. I almost missed it. Inside was a note, plain and folded in half. "Dear Kira, my name is Marie. My husband Joseph was on the same mission as Simon. I wasn't able to go overseas, and I never got a proper goodbye. But when I saw you on television, I felt like someone had finally said what I couldn't. Thank you. You made me feel less invisible. Love, Marie." I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and set it on the table beside my tea. By the end of the week, there were 6 more. Some typed, some handwritten, some from spouses. Others from grown children. One from a teenage girl who'd lost her mom on a relief mission in Nepal. Her handwriting slanted and uncertain. The message was always the same. We saw you, we felt that too. Thank you for saying it out loud. I didn't try to reply to them all, but I read every single one. Then someone tagged me in a photo on Instagram. A vigil was being organized by a volunteer group called Earthlight Watch. It wasn't official, not through the foundation or the news. Just a spontaneous gathering of people who wanted to say thank you and goodbye to someone they'd never met. It was going to be held at the Eden Botanical Center, a place Simon and I used to visit once a year, when the climate resilience team hosted donor walks. I hadn't been back there in over 2 years. I didn't RSVP. I didn't confirm I'd attend. I just went. The vigil started at dusk. There were candles lined along the greenhouse path and photographs printed on foam boards. Aid workers, scientists, volunteers, doctors. Some names I recognized. Most I didn't. No one spoke through a microphone. There were no speeches, just quiet. I kept to the back, watching strangers link arms, watching names whispered into night air and candles float in shallow pools. There was a gentleness to it, the kind I hadn't felt since the last time Simon came home safely from a mission. And then I saw him, Tom. He stood on the other side of the greenhouse wall, half hidden behind a line of trellises. He wasn't wearing a suit or dress clothes, just jeans and a gray hoodie pulled tight around his neck, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the ground, not moving. He didn't try to approach me. He didn't even look up when I turned. But I saw him. I left before the vigil ended. That night, around 11, I got a message. Didn't think it'd spread like this. Tom. I stared at it, thumb hovering. I didn't wait long to reply. Grief builds walls or bridges. You chose yours. I didn't expect a response. I didn't need one. Somewhere between the silence and the crowd, I had stopped looking for what wasn't coming and started walking with those who were already there. The idea came while I was standing in line at the DMV. I was there to update my license, remove Simon's emergency contact, change the mailing address. I'd been avoiding it for weeks. As I waited, a woman 2 people ahead of me was quietly crying, trying to fill out a form with shaking hands. A staff member asked if she was okay. She said she'd just come back from burying her sister abroad, and everything felt heavier now. No one knew what to say. She apologized for crying, apologized for taking up space. And I remember thinking, why is it always the person grieving who feels like the burden? That night, I stayed up drafting the framework for what would become the Bridge Initiative, a support network, not therapy, not bureaucracy, just presence. Rides from the airport, someone waiting with a coffee, a familiar face holding a sign that says, "You're not alone." I wasn't trying to launch anything huge. I just knew how much it would have meant to have someone there, anyone, when I landed. I posted a short announcement on Simon's Foundation page the next day, launching a new initiative in memory of those who return home alone. Volunteers needed, drivers, meal preppers, and most importantly, listeners. We'll meet them where they land. The first volunteer message came in 20 minutes later, then 3 more. By the end of the day, I had 20 names. A logistics firm in Richmond reached out on day 3. The CEO said she'd watched my interview and wept in her car before walking into a board meeting. Her company donated a passenger van, white, clean, basic, and offered to cover gas for 6 months. I cried quietly the night it was delivered. We called it the first bridge pickup. 3 of us showed up at Terminal B at Ronald Reagan National Airport with a handmade sign, "You're not alone." A woman named Celia walked out of the arrivals gate, clutching only a small bag and an envelope. She didn't speak at first, just nodded when we asked, "Celia?" and fell into our arms like we were family. After the drop-off, we went out for sandwiches. Later that night, a voicemail appeared on my phone. It was my mother. "Hi, Kira. I know it's been a while, but, well, your brother told me about what you've started. I watched the segment. I didn't realize." Her voice cracked, but she tried to recover. "I've been thinking about us, about Simon, about how they came across. I wish we could, I hope, maybe, we can talk sometime, when you're ready." I listened to the whole thing, all 2 minutes and 27 seconds. Then I pressed delete. The next day, a notification came through. Anonymous donation received. $250 from no name. Note, no note attached. But I recognized the last 4 digits of the card number. It was Tom's. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry anymore, but because I'd already learned something important. Some people leave because they don't know how to stay. And some stay, quietly, without fuss, because they know exactly what it means to be left. That's who I built the bridge for. Not for applause, not for reconciliation, but for the next Kira. For the one stepping off the plane with no one waiting, so she'd never have to walk alone again. The paper hit the newsstands on a Thursday. From ashes to arrival, one woman's quiet revolution. That was the headline. Right there above the fold, front page of the Washington Sentinel. The photo was from a bridge event the week before. I was hugging a new widow, a woman named Tasha, who had just flown back from Senegal after her husband's sudden death from malaria. She hadn't known what to expect when she landed. She told me later she almost backed out at the last second. The photo captured us mid-embrace, just after she'd whispered, "I thought no one would be here." My arms were around her, her face buried in my shoulder, and for once, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's tragedy. I looked like what I was becoming. Someone who knew how to catch others before they hit the ground. The article was long, almost 3 full columns, and included quotes from aid groups, grief counselors, even the logistics CEO who donated the first van. They talked about dignity, about visibility, about how the bridge was becoming something real. At the very end, they asked me what I hoped people took from it. I said, I don't want applause. I just don't want the next person to walk out of that gate and feel like I did. That's it. Later that week, I got an invitation I hadn't expected. A formal letter printed on thick paper with a gold emblem. The annual memorial for families of fallen aid workers I'd been asked to speak. Simon had spoken there twice. I remembered how steady his voice had sounded at that same podium, even while telling stories about disaster zones and collapsed bridges. He used to say, "Grief isn't an obstacle, it's a map." I didn't know what to wear. The day of the event, I kept it simple. Black blazer, flats, nothing dramatic. The ceremony was held at the Founders Auditorium downtown. High ceilings, quiet lighting, chairs filled with people who understood loss the moment they looked at you. When they called my name, I walked up without notes, no script. I stood at the podium, looked out into a crowd of parents, spouses, siblings, and said, "I came home from a cremation." There were no arms waiting, no home-cooked meal, no familiar voices, just silence. I thought grief would break me, but I learned that grief only breaks what's hollow. The rest, the real parts of you. They reshape, they reach, and sometimes they build something new. No one clapped at first, just silence. A quiet kind, respectful, real. As I stepped down, a man in his 60s grabbed my hand gently and said, "You saved my daughter." I didn't know his name, but I knew what he meant. Tasha was standing nearby, her eyes glassy. She didn't speak, just nodded. Then I saw them, across the lawn, under the shade of a dogwood tree, my mother and Tom. They weren't seated with the guests. They weren't dressed for the occasion, just standing, watching. Not close enough to speak, not far enough to deny they came. Tom had his hands in his pockets. My mother held her purse tightly under her arm, like she wasn't sure if she should be proud or ashamed. I didn't go to them. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. They were there, not out of support, but maybe out of recognition. Maybe regret. But I'd already stopped asking for what they couldn't give. I turned away and walked back toward the building, toward the crowd that had already started forming around the volunteers from the bridge. People I barely knew. People who already felt like family. It was just past 11 on a Tuesday night when the knock came at the back door. 2 volunteers stood on my porch, shivering slightly under their jackets, arms full of folded blankets, protein bars, and fresh socks. Nate and Lena, they'd only signed up a few weeks ago, but they moved like they'd been part of the bridge forever. I let them in, waved them toward the kitchen island, and put the kettle on without asking. "We doubled up on mittens this time," Lena said, setting a cardboard box gently on the counter. "Some of the pickups are saying the airport terminals are running cold at night." "They're right," I said. "Thanks for noticing." We didn't talk long. Just sorted supplies, traded a few stories from recent arrivals. laughed quietly over the way one young kid mistook Nate for his uncle and clung to him the whole ride. When they left, we hugged like old friends, even though we barely knew each other outside of shared grief and service. That's the thing I'd learned. Grief doesn't require shared history, just shared understanding. After they were gone, I stood barefoot in the kitchen, folding clothes into another care kit. A clean t-shirt, a toothbrush, a note with the next 3 pickup times. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from my mother, a screenshot of the front page story, the photo of me with Tasha at the memorial, the headline still bold above our faces. No caption, no words. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some silences are heavy because they're hollow. Others are heavy because they're full of everything that should have been said long ago. I folded the last shirt and set it gently inside the box, taped it closed. There was peace in the motion now. No urgency, no bitterness, just care. It had taken me weeks to understand that my strength wasn't in ignoring the hurt. It was in refusing to let it be the end of the story. Simon used to say the most radical thing you could do was show up when no one else did. Not with banners or noise, just presence. I didn't need revenge. I needed to become what was missing when I stepped off that plane, for someone else. I looked at the growing pile of kits near the door. Some would be handed out this weekend. Others would ride in the van with new volunteers. All of them were stitched together by loss, and yet, somehow, none of them felt heavy. I already knew what I'd say to the next woman who walked out of those airport doors with no one waiting. The same words I wish someone had said to me. Become what they weren't. Then you'll never be alone again.